Hello and welcome to Bird Brain. This episode I'm joined by Dr Mathew Hoskins, and as it's now been another 6 episodes, he's joining me for the second ever Bonus Beasts episode, which is my chance to stray from birds and explore other creatures in the animal kingdom. Thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
That's okay. I am going to continue to probably just call you Hoskins, despite the fact I gave you the highfalutin Dr. Mathew Hoskins intro. It's respectful to do that, but seeing as I have been friends with Hoskins for about 25 years, I can't be giving him a title all the way through. It's just very uncomfortable. So, before I divulge way more personal information about you, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about what you do?
Sure.
And who our bonus beast of this episode is?
Absolutely. So yeah, thanks for having me. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, so I've got a split job. I look after a psychiatric intensive care unit in Cardiff, and I'm also a trauma specialist, so I'm the lead consultant psychiatrist for adults for traumatic stress Wales, and I'm very much interested in the pharmacological, the medication management side of post-traumatic stress disorder in particular, and that's where I've done some of my research, and I'm very interested in psychedelics and how they can be used in mental health as well. And I've picked, or you've helped me pick, Iorek Byrnison, who is the armoured talking polar bear from his Dark Materials that becomes friends with Lyra. And it was an amazing trilogy of books to read. You actually recommended them.
I did. I was
did.
Definitely going to say that if you didn't say it. I was like,
No.
please give me the shout
Yeah.
out that I need.
Absolutely. Props to Callie for that. And I loved it so much that I named my little dog Lyra, and she might bark in the background, but
Yeah.
she's cool.
And for those of you that don't know Lyra, she is a gorgeous little Jack Chi.
Yeah.
She is also as willful as as her namesake, not the real Lyra.
Yeah, the name fits her to a T. She's a little bugger. She's great.
So it's quite nice that we're doing this episode now, because my last episode was actually on Kaiser, the snow goose, which is also from this series.
Oh.
I've obviously been very eager to do them because Northern Lights is my favourite book.
Yeah.
Now, I am going to give the listeners a little bit of context for this, because you've already mentioned the fact that it's a trilogy. It's a dense trilogy too. It covers a lot of things. Iorek is very much part of that cast of thousands. So I'm going to do a little spiel to give everyone a bit of context. So, in Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, we basically follow the protagonist, Lyra Belacqua. She's a headstrong and fiercely independent 11-year-old. I like that because I read it at that age, so I really related to her. Her journey takes her from the cloisters of Jordan College, Oxford, it's the real Lyra.
On cue.
Okay, so her journey takes her from the cloisters of Jordan College, Oxford, to parallel worlds.
With it, I'll just remind her that I can spray it.
It's okay.
Like, come on, get in.
Look at her face.
Protecting. Oh, maybe she can go do the podcast with us. Actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
I really like that though. Come here. Lyra. Anna. Lyra. She's like, I didn't do anything. Okay, so, okay.
From the cloisters.
Yeah,
Maybe?
so whose journey takes her from the cloisters of Jordan College, Oxford, to parallel worlds. She's caught up in dark conspiracies and essentially what becomes a battle for control over consciousness, freedom, and the soul. His Dark Materials has got that typical sort of coming of age arc that we would expect from fantasy and from a YA offering. But personally, I think what makes it so enduring so many years on is because it's also about resisting authoritarian control, navigating moral grey areas, and understanding the weight of choice. Lyra basically ends up embroiled in a war to end all wars, as all the protagonists in this genre are wont to do. She has a remarkable cast of allies and adversaries. She's got witches, scholars, rebels, angels, and obviously most significantly for this episode, a certain armoured bear. But Iorek Byrnison isn't just the muscle of this group. He's basically a warrior philosopher. He's a dethroned king who's lost everything and yet remains quietly noble. When we meet him, he's been exiled, disarmed, and he's essentially emotionally broken. He's drunk, disgraced, and forced to work in servitude to humans. He's a shadow of who he once was. And yet, like many of the creatures in Pullman's worlds, Iorek reflects back something very human, the experience of trauma, identity loss, and what it takes to heal from those things. What makes Iorek so compelling to me, and why he deserves a bonus piece episode in my mind, is that while his role is essentially to support Lyra, and we don't even meet him to chapter 11, is that his inner transformation mirrors hers in these subtle but profound ways. He doesn't reclaim his title through brute force alone. He's saved by connection, trust, and by being seen, making him the perfect subject for today's conversation. Now, that was a long spiel. Thank you for bearing with me. But obviously, this is a hefty trilogy.
Yeah.
So, again, thank you so much for joining me, Hoskins.
You're very welcome.
Before we get into the heavy stuff, can you tell me what you think makes Iorek such a compelling character?
I think the first thing is that he's a really striking image when you first meet him, and he's literally a 10-foot tall polar bear that can talk. And then you learn a little bit more about him. He's in quite a broken situation to begin with. He's working for the humans. You discover that he has lost his armour, been tricked. He's been tricked to kill another bear by humans, and as punishment for that crime of killing another bear, the humans have also taken his armour. They got him drunk and they stripped him of his armour. And having armour is cool.
Yeah.
I own a little bit of medieval armour.
And actually, why do you own medieval armour? What was the cause of all this?
Oh my god, maybe I want to be Iorek. Maybe it was no, it wasn't that. Armour's cool.
You totally also bought it for my folklore party.
I did, completely. And then my 40th birthday as well, dressing up like a knight was good fun. But yeah, no, it's a striking image to think of like a gigantic bear in shining armour, but the armour is really meaningful to Iorek, because in his culture, the Panzerborn, their armour is their soul, and without it, they're broken, they're apart from themselves.
Yeah.
He's been exiled, he's living with humans, something's the matter psychologically with him. He's working for strong spirits and deer legs on board. Just that character, how you meet him, his arc as he kind of changes, just a very cool character.
Yeah, thank you. We've obviously just touched on the fact that he's essentially been tricked and enslaved.
Yeah.
We've also touched on the fact that there was a catalyst for this, which is the killing of another bear. And you said he was tricked into doing so. Now, I would argue that that is a traumatic event. As a psychiatrist, do you want to dispel all the pop psychology and psychiatry that we hear online and tell us a bit more about what exactly constitutes a traumatic event, and also what might happen when someone goes through a traumatic event?
Yeah, so a traumatic event could be any experience that's unpleasant or can cause distress or anxiety, and trauma in a broad sense can also refer to the effects of a traumatic event. And then in psychiatry terms, we are really interested in how trauma can cause post-traumatic stress disorder, which is my specialty, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder as well. So talking about traumatic events, we can think about things that happen in childhood. We can think about awful things that can happen to young vulnerable children, physical, emotional, sexual abuse and neglect and those sorts of things. It can happen later on in life. It can happen through losing a loved one, or interpersonal violence. It can happen in relationships, domestic violence, all these sorts of things. It could be a natural disaster, it could be escaping a conflict zone, all these sorts of things. These are all traumatic events. Now, when someone's been through a traumatic event, it's quite normal to have a psychological experience in terms of having maybe nightmares of the thing that's happened coming back to you, or having images of it coming back to you during the daytime, feeling not quite yourself, maybe feeling a bit more anxious. And the majority of the time, the majority of people, when they've been through a traumatic event, will go through a process of experiencing those things over several weeks, but they usually resolve. And then the thing that's happened, it was bad, but you allow it to become the past. we might call your experience in those few weeks an acute stress reaction, which is completely normal, a natural thing to go through. But what can happen when someone's been through a very significantly horrifying or life-threatening event?
Yeah.
We'd actually classified the level of trauma as being a little bit higher.
Okay.
So maybe not like losing your job or a relationship being over, but a bit more, you've experienced, violence, you've been in a car accident, those sorts of things. So when someone's experienced one of these, horrifying, life-threatening events, they'll go through that acute stress reaction period. But if they still have significant symptoms after a month, they may have developed an illness that we call post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. So I can tell you a little bit more about what PTSD looks like. And for my money, it's probably one of the distressing, serious mental illnesses.
Yeah.
Because you're living with the worst thing that's ever happened to you over and over again every day. So we break the symptoms of PTSD down into a few different groups. And the first group we might call re-experiencing symptoms.
Okay.
And what that means is during the day you might have intrusive, unwanted, repetitive images of the traumatic event, or different memories of it. It could be re-experiencing the smell of something, coming back to you over and over again, but it feels just as bad or almost as bad emotionally, the distress attached to it, as when it first occurred. It's not just a memory that you're remembering, it still has the emotion attached to it. And things can get a little bit more severe than that. Not so much that you're just having a memory, but some people actually feel like they're reliving the trauma, and they're no longer really present in the here and now in the room, but they're actually doing something called dissociating a little bit, and they're actually feeling like they are back in the then and there. And that's what we might call like a flashback, that kind of thing. So that's when you're awake during the day, you have those experiences, and then very unfortunately, sleep doesn't really give you respite, because you can fall asleep, but then having trauma-related nightmares is very characteristic of PTSD. So people will have, a replay of the event or elements of the event, really highly distressing in their sleep as a nightmare that then wakes them up from sleep. And difficulty sleeping is another very, very common experience with PTSD. So those are the re-experiencing type symptoms. Then you've got what we call hyperarousal symptoms, or changes to arousal. Now, what that really looks like is that someone can feel an ever-present sense of danger or threat around. After the traumatic event, lots of other things feel scary and frightening a lot of the time. And if there's an unexpected knock at the door, or a loud bang, someone might be very easily startled, jumping out of their skin, that kind of thing. They might find it really difficult to feel safe and to feel the ability to relax. And what's really happening there is the traumatic events or series of events have changed the way that the brain actually functions. So at the level of the brain, you've got different parts that do different things, and you've got a part of the brain that's very much involved in fear. So this is a part of the brain called the amygdala and the insula as well. The activity in the amygdala and the insula, when you see something or experience something scary, is they become, active. In PTSD, they're hyperactive more of the time to things that aren't actually immediately dangerous. So those fear centers are overactive, and then you've got some other structures in the brain that are kind of sitting behind your forehead above your eyes, and they're called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And what these parts of the brain do is they put the emotional brakes back on the fear. That's what they should normally do. So if you didn't have PTSD and you're out and about, you're walking through the streets of Cardiff, you turn a corner and you happen to see a 10-foot tall armoured bear that's talking, your amygdala would fire up, and you think, oh my goodness, this Iorek is going to tear me to shreds.
But also, can I pet that dog?
Can I pet that dog?
100%. Can I pet that dog?
And we're actually both petting Lyra at the moment.
Can I have a selfie with the armoured bear, please? I'm going to put it all on my socials right now. Does it bite though?
I totally want to make friends with a bear.
I know, me too. I'm like, please.
So you've turned this corner, there's a big bear in front of you, your amygdala would fire up and think, oh my God, it's a bear. But then, when you actually look a little bit closer, it's a cardboard cutout of a bear.
Okay.
So your VMPFC, your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, would say, "Oh, don't worry, this isn't actually dangerous." They would put the emotional brakes on and calm the amygdala down.
Right. Okay.
So that's how things should normally work. In the brain of someone who's experienced and has PTSD, the amygdala and the insula are overactive more of the time, and the emotional brake parts are underactive more of the time as well.
Okay.
So that's the reason why it's an illness characterized by fear, which is an awful thing to feel. So that's our re-experiencing and our changes to arousal kind of symptoms. And then you've got some other things as well. Avoidance is a really big behavior that people have as a way of protecting themselves.
Yeah.
When you've been through a traumatic event, you don't want to think about it, you don't want to talk about it, you might have cognitive avoidance of it, you might try to suppress the thoughts when they come up. And as you're going about your day, there might be reminders that you don't want to be experiencing. There might be a storyline on TV, related to your trauma, or it could be the sound of siren, ambulance sirens if you had like a medical kind of trauma event. And you might think, well, actually, I don't want to be around those reminders. I'm going to have to change my life and live it a little bit smaller so I don't experience those triggers. And, that works. If you can avoid something, you won't have the experience of being, having a trigger from it. But that means that people's lives get significantly smaller.
Okay.
And then there are some characteristic ways that people think and feel after trauma as well. So it's really common for people to be angry. Yeah. For them to be angry at themselves, at the world or the perpetrators, and that can have a bigger impact within relationships as well. It's really common for people to feel guilty. Yeah. If for something they did, something they didn't do, even though it wasn't their fault. The brain will try to make sense of an event, try and find a reason why it happened, and oftentimes that's turned inwards, unfortunately. And people can struggle a lot with emotional numbing too. Yeah. Almost emotional avoidance. They can feel more distant and detached from other people and find it difficult feeling close after a traumatic event. Not in all cases, but certainly in some. So that's PTSD in a nutshell. And it's probably also worth mentioning that PTSD has got really high rates of what we call comorbidities. You have PTSD, but then you also have another condition. So, there's high rates of people having PTSD and also suffering with a diagnosable anxiety or depressive illness. And up to half of people will also struggle with substance misuse with PTSD as well. Yeah. And that kind of leads us back to, thinking of Iorek, because when we meet him, he's drinking this like fiery spirit by the jugful. When you're hurt, when you're experiencing PTSD, it can be really, really tempting, easy to drink alcohol or to use drugs because they will make you feel a little bit better for a period of time. They can be a crutch, they can be a way of getting through the day, but then obviously the problems with alcohol and drugs is that they'll often make a problem then worse afterwards, and then you're not just dealing with your trauma and your symptoms, but you're then dealing with an addiction that's harming your body too.
It's one of the pivotal moments when we're trying to get an understanding of Iorek in the story. Yeah. Serafina Picala, who we trust, she's part of the Witches' Council. She's very wise. Witches live hundreds of years. They have a very symbiotic relationship with nature in the novel. They're very strategic in their vision. She describes the situation he's in and says, when bears act like people, perhaps they can be tricked. When bears act like bears, perhaps they can't. No bear would normally drink spirits. Iorek Byrnison drank to forget the shame of exile, and it was only that which let the trollers and people trick him. And I think, as you're touching on, if we become isolated or avoidant, potentially we exhibit other behaviours that were uncharacteristic for us before, but become a crutch. Because if we're retreating from the world, or in this case of Iorek's, exile from social scenarios, and obviously this is something that people do experience, like maybe not as harsh as exile, but when a relationship fails, often there's dynamic changes in the social group you're part of. When you retire, if you suffer injury, it can cause you to suddenly be very vulnerable because your life does get smaller.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something I'm interested in is, why do some people get PTSD when others don't? Because there are
Yeah.
obviously scenarios where people experience the same thing at the same time. Like if you are unlucky enough to be at a terrible event,
Yeah.
some people will exhibit it and others won't.
Really good question. So a lot of it has to do with resilience factors.
Okay.
And say you were in a car accident or something like that. And after the event, you went to hospital and you had lots of care around you, and your family and friends came and saw you, and you knew that you could talk to them about it if you wanted to. You felt like psychologically safe enough to think, oh, I'm ready to talk about it, I'm not ready to talk about it, I nearly died, big events, that kind of thing. Generally, people that have got good social support or community, or access to medical professionals if they need it, will do better and may not develop PTSD. But when people don't have that, that's when they're going to be more likely to develop PTSD, when they're holding that trauma just by themselves with no one else to talk to about it when they're ready. What we know about trauma in kind of larger incidents, maybe when multiple people have experienced something, we used to do debriefing. That used to be something that happened like a very long time ago. And the research of my mentor, Prof. Bisson, helped show that actually that can be harmful.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So after, say, like a mass casualty event, that kind of thing, you shouldn't sit everyone down at the same time and say, right, I want you all to talk about your trauma for us right now. That's not the right thing to do. What we should really be doing is making sure people know that they can talk about it if and when they need to, and that support is available. Some other things that can influence whether or not someone will develop PTSD can be the type of trauma, unfortunately. So some traumatic events do increase the risk of developing PTSD, especially sexual traumas. PTSD is more common in women if we look at it in terms of prevalence and incidence. That's probably because women are more likely to be the victims of certain types of traumatic events, which is very sad.
Yeah.
And then what's heartbreaking as a trauma specialist is when you're looking at the news and seeing how much willful trauma has been inflicted on populations that can't escape it. When we're thinking of what's happening in Gaza, in Palestine, which is just dreadful and heartbreaking. But if you go to certain conflict-afflicted regions, some research, which I might be out of date on this, but up to 25% of people there are going to have PTSD. When you're looking at a sustained conflict, that's going to be a lot higher.
It's an exceptionally hard task to segue away from a conversation about willful genocide and bring it back to a polar bear. But I am going to attempt that. I'm going to attempt that task. So obviously with Iorek, we are looking at one of a species, and we're not looking at a wider scale, like traumatic event or anything. But I was considering his repetitive behaviours that are called out in the book, like when he's confined by the humans. And so obviously that made me want to look into whether captive polar bears exhibit these sort of behaviours.
Yeah.
And there was a really interesting piece of research done saying that stereotypic behaviours, which are considered repetitive and purposeless actions, such as pacing or swimming in fixed patterns, captive polar bears frequently exhibit those, and these are widely recognised as being signs of distress. There was a fascinating behavioural study at the Singapore Zoo that found that 2 of their bears engaged in stereotypic behaviours for a significant portion of their active periods. And when I say significant, I mean one of them spent nearly 65% of their day, and the other one 57% of their day in these stereotypic behaviours. And I thought, wow, it doesn't surprise me though, because this lack of control and choice is obviously really depressing.
Yeah.
Like we got an insight into that in the pandemic.
Yeah.
And research has shown that providing the bears with the option to maybe access a different area within their enclosure might lead to a decreased stereotypic behavior and increase their social interactions. But surely it's not a shock that environmental enrichment and autonomy are crucial for well-being, just like it is for ours. Tragically, there was the case of Gus. Have you heard about him, the Central Park polar bear?
Is this a sad story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, I think it underscores the psychological impact of captivity, because Gus was known for swimming obsessively in his pool for like 12 hours a day. And I mean, in that cyclical way, you know, just the same route again and again and again. And that behavior was attributed to like boredom and stress. In fact, it was so severe that he was treated with Prozac, that he underwent environmental enrichment programs, and they did slightly reduce, but they didn't eliminate his stereotypic behaviors. And I think that while it's unrealistic to expect fantasy or a Disney movie or children's books to totally reflect the real world, I like the fact that Philip Pullman has made an effort to reproduce things that are known factors in the world. Like for captive bears, I thought that was a really interesting thing that he's managed to mirror in there. So obviously Iorek does not become a character that just paces around trapped. He is essentially liberated by his relationship with Lyra, and the bond they create sees him regain his position in society. And if anything, while doing so, he becomes more compassionate to others at large. I guess my question to you is, in real life, right?
Yeah.
Is that ever the case, that you need to have somebody intervene, or you need to have the issue addressed head on to expect an improvement? Like, is there a point where it will become harder to get back to yourself if you are living with PTSD and it's left untreated?
Yeah, so I suppose, you know, if someone's got PTSD and they haven't sought help and it's been decades and their symptoms are really severe, it's going to be maybe more difficult to treat, but treatment is available, and the treatments work. So when we're treating PTSD, the gold standard first line intervention is going to be what we call a trauma-focused psychological therapy, or a TFPT.
Okay.
And that's an umbrella term for a number of different models of talking therapy, or psychological therapy, or psychotherapy for short as well. And how it looks is that you would get into therapy first by talking to your GP. Your GP will ask you some questions. They may think that, you know, your PTSD is a single event and, you know, mild, moderate, and you might have talking therapy in primary care. Or they might think, oh, this is a little bit worse, this is a little bit more severe. You actually need secondary mental health care, and you get referred in Wales to a community mental health team. And you might have some trauma therapy given by a psychologist in a CMHT, or you might get referred to the clinic that I work in Cardiff, the Traumatic Stress Service. But TFPTs, trauma-focused psychological therapies, it's an umbrella term for different models of therapy. A few of the well-known ones would be EMDR, lots of acronyms, unfortunately.
What does that stand for?
So EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy. Big old mouthful.
What does it mean?
What it means, maybe how it was discovered is a bit more enlightening.
Yes, please.
So, created by a psychologist called Shapiro, who noticed that when they themselves had been through a traumatic event, I believe the story is they were on a train.
Yeah.
And they're looking out the window at the train
Yeah.
as they're thinking about this traumatic event, and as the train's moving down, you know, poles, trees, you know, catch their gaze, and their eyes were moving left to right. And if you look at someone's eyes as they're on a train, if they're just looking out, you know, out of the window, their eyes will be darting left to right because you're fixing on something as it moves past before fixing on the next thing. And what Shapiro discovered is there's something interesting when you have bilateral eye movements,
okay,
whilst also holding on to the image or the feeling of a trauma in your mind. bilateral hemispheric stimulation. So the two hemispheres of the brain are doing something whilst you're thinking of a traumatic event. How EMDR looks is that you meet with a therapist. You're probably meeting with them for 6 to 16 or 20 plus weeks. You'll build up to the trauma processing part. That won't happen immediately, but when you build up to the trauma processing part, you'll usually be sat kind of opposite each other. You'll be asked to like hold an image of the trauma in your mind as you then move your eyes from left to right, following the therapist's finger movements, or they might use a light beam, or it might be tapping on the knees, that kind of thing. And EMDR has been proven to work through multiple clinical trials and meta-analyses, and we know it's a really effective and quite a rapid-acting treatment for PTSD. I'm not actually trained in EMDR. That's something that I want to be doing over the next couple of years. Some of the other models I am trained in, so you've got CBT-TF, or cognitive behavioral therapy with a trauma focus. So lots of people have heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It can be used in lots of conditions. We always think of it as, being used in depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
But the CBT model can be adapted in lots of different ways. So CBT-TF might ask you to build up to the trauma over the course of several weeks, getting to know each other, doing some basic grounding techniques and those sorts of things. And then when you start doing trauma processing, you might start to talk about the trauma in the third person, past tense, with your eyes open.
Okay.
And talk the narrative through. So this is called prolonged exposure. So you might start to talk through from the start until the end of the trauma with the therapist in a nice, safe environment. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes recording that and then going home and listening to it repeatedly in between sessions.
That's really brave.
It's incredibly hard work.
It's really brave.
It's hard, but you're well supported.
Yeah.
But you really can't discount the labor that goes into therapy in between sessions. You're asking patients to do a lot of difficult work, but it is possible to do, and it does work. Really want to emphasize that. So in CBT-TF, with prolonged exposure, as the weeks progress, you then start to talk about the trauma in first person, present tense, with your eyes closed, and the therapist is trying to bring out more detail of the traumatic event, and you take it home and you listen to it. And what happens with that model of therapy is something called habituation.
Okay.
So habituation is a psychological thing that happens. If something is anxiety provoking, it starts happening to you, your anxiety will go up. If this thing is still present, your anxiety will kind of peak and then reach a plateau. There's a physiological limit to how much anxiety your body can create, and you'll find that peak and then plateau. And then after a while, naturally, even if the stimulus is still there, your anxiety will start to reduce and eventually reduce down to nothing. It's thought that when your anxiety is reduced by about 50%, your body has learned something, that actually it didn't kill you, it wasn't that dangerous, you've survived, maybe it wasn't as dangerous. The second time you experience the same stimulus, your anxiety will shoot up again, but maybe not as high. It might plateau a little bit lower.
Okay.
It might come down a little bit quicker, and you've habituated at an earlier point. Do that over and over again, essentially. You habituate to a terrible thing, and you allow your body and your mind to learn that the thing that happened is in the past, and it's been severed from the present. And then maybe just one more model is cognitive therapy for PTSD, or CT-PTSD. And this is a really interesting model. I was trained in this quite a few years ago, where you try to find what was the belief about the traumatic event as it occurred. So if we take an example of maybe being in a car accident, your belief at the time might be, I'm going to die, I'm about to die, I'm going to lose my family, they'll be without me. And what happens with PTSD and belief is that belief can stick to the present. And what you're doing is a similar thing creating the narrative, but going back into the memory, finding out what the belief was then, and then updating it with new information. I'm going to die, I'm going to leave my family. What do you know actually happened? Well, I was seriously injured, I went to hospital, I recovered, I came back to my family, I didn't die. What I know now is, and you insert that into the memory.
Okay.
And then there's lots of other interesting things like stimulus discrimination. Maybe you're in an accident with a white van, and every time you see a white van, it's a potent trigger. It brings a lot of distress. So what I love about cognitive therapy for PTSD is you do a lot of out of office work. So you might meet in an office, and then you think, right, we're going to go for a walk around the block. We're going to try and find some white vans. And then you walk around the block and you see a white van, the person has a reaction, you think, right, okay, we're nice and safe on the pavement here. I want you to tell me what's different about this white van compared to that white van.
Okay.
And you might say, well, okay, I'm seeing this white van today, and the date today is, what are we looking at? The 1st of May, 2025. I know the accident happened X year, X date. I'm stood here next to my psychiatrist. I'm not in a car. This white van looks a little bit different. It's coming down the road. This isn't the road I had the crash on. And you update the stimulus with some discriminating information. So you so you can tell this white van is different to the one that hit me, that kind of thing. So those are some of the different broad models of trauma-focused psychological therapy, and medication's my specialty as well. So So, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a prescribing doctor. My background in research started with, I've mentioned him already, Prof. Bisson, took me under his wing when I was a baby psychiatrist and got me doing some research on drug treatments for PTSD. So when you're trying to find out, does a certain medication work in PTSD, they'll design a clinical trial where they'll have, say, a group of 100 patients, they'll split them in two. They'll give one group the medication and another group a placebo or dummy pill that doesn't do anything. The patients won't know what treatment they've had. Everyone else in the study won't know either. And they'll be randomized into group A or group B. So that's called a randomized placebo-controlled trial, or an RCT we call it for short. So there might be lots of RCTs about a certain drug in PTSD. There might be 5 on the antidepressant sertraline and 2 or 3 on this drug, that kind of thing. Now, some of those studies on sertraline might be positive and some are negative. So as doctors, what are we supposed to do with that information? Believe the positive ones, believe the negative ones. So the research I did is called a systematic review and meta-analysis.
Okay.
And what that is that you design a search whereby you try to find everything published that's relevant, and you end up having thousands and thousands of hits through all these different search mechanisms.
Okay.
And then you screen all the titles and then all the abstracts and then all the papers you'd read in full until you've got the ones that you're looking for. And then you assess their risk of bias, because in all research there's bias. There might be biased reporting, it might be industry funded, it might be this or that, and you've got to kind of systematically assess the quality of the paper in terms of bias. Then you extract all the data and you add all the apples together, and then you might add all the oranges together, and then you can say these 5 or 6 studies of this drug, when you add them all together, actually shows it is effective or it's not effective. So what we found from the first systematic review was that there's good evidence of a small effect for a small number of antidepressants.
Okay.
I think it was back in, I can't remember the year, but I updated it maybe 2021, something like that. And we used the evidence that we generated to actually create what was called the Cardiff prescribing algorithm that we've now updated to the All Wales Traumatic Stress Wales prescribing algorithm for PTSD. And what we know is that there's 4 specific antidepressants that can reduce the symptom burden of PTSD to a small effect. Sertraline, paroxetine, fluoxetine, and venlafaxine. And there's also evidence that you can add other drugs to the first drug, and you can have more of an effect as well. So that's called drug augmentation, where you've got 2 drugs working together. So there's 2 antipsychotics, quetiapine and risperidone, and a really interesting heart medicine called prazosin, which can reduce symptom burden. Prazosin in particular is really quite game-changing. It's a heart medicine, so it lowers your blood pressure, but it probably has a specific effect of reducing nightmares first, and then the flashbacks, and then the daytime hyperarousal symptoms,
which must be such a relief.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really relatively easy medication to take and to come off if you need to as well. The gold standard treatment of these talking therapies, second line interventions and medications, but the way that they're used is actually back to front a lot of the time.
Oh, okay.
Most people that I see in my clinic, which is quite a specialist clinic, but most people in primary care, in secondary care, might end up on a medication before they have therapy. The reason for that is, can you guess?
It's easier to access that?
Yeah, waiting lists.
Yeah.
So even in primary care, there could be a significant wait before you're starting a therapy, and your symptoms might be so bad that you're not able to function, to leave the house, to work. So it's the humane thing to do, to prescribe, to do anything you can to reduce that symptom burden.
So how long have you been a psychiatrist now?
That's a really good question. And I always forget. I think I've been a doctor for 17 years, and I've been a psychiatrist for the majority of that. 14, 15 years.
Have you seen an increase or a decrease in waitlist times?
Yeah, so that is a really good question. I've worked in lots of different teams over that time. I've only been in my trauma clinic team for the past, say, 3 or 4 years, that kind of thing. And our wait list usually hovers between 1.5 to 2 years. I think it's down to about 1.5 years at the moment. That's a really long time to wait for trauma therapy. So a lot of the patients I see are people who've just joined the waiting list, or people that are coming to the top of the waiting list, and I'm trying to get their symptoms under control so they're psychologically ready enough for trauma therapy. But one of the big problems with trauma, with PTSD, and I should say complex PTSD as well, is the majority of what I deal with, which is slightly different to PTSD, is treatment resistance.
Yeah.
So,
and by that, you don't mean that people themselves do not want treatment, do you?
No.
Because I have heard that phrase, I actually... I was once described as treatment resistant, and I was very offended. And then I was like, I just didn't understand what it meant.
Yeah, no. So treatment resistance is, in medical terms, is failure to respond to usually 2 conventional evidence-based treatments. So I'd be quite strict in saying you define treatment resistance in PTSD as failure to respond to 2 kind of gold standard psychological therapies, and if the person can't tolerate psychological therapies, 2 medications, that kind of thing. So what we know about trauma-focused therapy is that it's really effective, but in some research, sometimes up to half of people can't benefit fully from it, can't tolerate it.
Oh, that's a big statistic.
The worst case scenario, I think, in some research, that's the outlier. I think up to 50%. The reason for that, though, is because you're asking someone to do something difficult, which is process the worst thing that's ever happened to them. Common to all trauma-focused therapies is this idea that you need to be able to be within what's called the optimal window of arousal. Now, if you imagine like a window in front of you, the outside is the other side of you, you're on the inside, there's a wall above the window and a wall below the window. The window's in the middle of the room.
Yeah.
You need to be able to get through the window. Now, some people with PTSD are so hyper aroused, they're not able to relax, they're not able to let their guard down. They're above the window, hitting the wall. They can't get through the window.
Okay.
Other people who are more like emotionally, disconnected or dissociated, under aroused, are hitting the wall below the window. So to be able to tolerate trauma-focused therapy, you need to do that work, at the start, to be able to tolerate, not being hyper vigilant, not being, dissociated, that you can go through the window, and that's really difficult. And that kind of led me from my research and experiences into looking at more unconventional treatment options, which enter MDMA.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
MDMA is basically going to be the human version of what Lyra is to Iorek, right?
Oh, I like that.
I like that. Like, basically, not everybody can have a Lyra.
Yeah.
Not everybody can have somebody that can just rewire their brain for them, give them purpose, understand them, give them space to be themselves, and, equip them with some armour to take on the world. So,
yeah,
I really want to know, what is it about MDMA treatment
Yeah.
that might be supporting people in returning to themselves, if you like. And what I'm really interested in is I've been considering how in Iorek's case, the reason he comes back to himself is not just that relationship, it's that by being her protector and returning to being a warrior, he's reconnected to himself. But that allowed him to reshape his internal story.
Yeah.
And it also crucially unlocked, as you were mentioning earlier, it allowed him to reshape that internal memory of the trauma that he'd experienced.
Yeah.
Because he'd isolated himself and used numbing agents via alcohol because of being tricked into killing the other bear. And through his relationship with Lyra and discussing this, he understood that the story wasn't like he'd been telling himself.
Yeah.
So is through MDMA treatment, is it something you can do? Is memory reconsolidation and reshaping how trauma is stored and emotionally processed, is that what you can do with that, and how does that work?
Just to set the scene, so MDMA, 3,4-methyl-N-deoxymethamphetamine for its full name.
You're very good at reeling off all these very, very lengthy
I've been
things.
giving talks on MDMA for God knows how many years.
And you feel the need to always say the full name just so that people know that you really know your stuff, right?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, fine.
Um,
Do it again.
3,4-methyl-N-deoxymethamphetamine.
Okay, you're saying it like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
It's probably the only tongue twister I can do.
Okay.
So MDMA, you might know it as the recreational drug ecstasy. It was first discovered in the 1920s, rediscovered for its psychoactive or mind-affecting properties in the 70s by a really interesting psychopharmacologist, a drugs that affect mind maker called Alexander. No, was it Sasha Shulgin or Alexander Shulgin? Called Shulgin. Yeah. And he used to discover and rediscover drugs, take them himself, and give it to some of his psychotherapy and psychiatrist friends. And for many years, MDMA was used in clinical settings, in psychotherapy. And it replaced LSD as the go-to drug of choice for drug-assisted psychotherapy in the 70s when LSD was banned. An MDMA is a psychedelic drug, a psychedelic substance, much like LSD or acid, that kind of thing. And psychedelics are probably the most fascinating chemical compound that we know of, I think. Because psychedelic means literally mind revealing, and these are drugs that allow you to experience your own consciousness altered, different, ineffable, in how you can experience a different sort of reality. Now, classical psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin or acid and magic mushrooms have quite a profound emotional, visual, sensory kind of effect. MDMA is a weak psychedelic in that regard. You don't really get much perceptual or kind of image hearing change. MDMA, you get more of a profound emotional experience. So for that reason, it's been called an empathogen or an entactogen psychedelic. It seems when it was used back in its heyday, people were starting to get an inkling that, this drug seems to work really well for trauma for some reason, and we're not quite sure why. Then, unfortunately, psychedelics were made illegal. First LSD fell, and then MDMA, and all the really promising things that we knew about it, we couldn't discover. For 40 plus years, it was banned, the research on these substances.
Is it unusual to blanket ban something when you could just be testing it for medicinal reasons?
Yeah. So psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin are quite physiologically inert. It's quite hard to do yourself physical damage with them compared to drugs like alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, heroin, those sorts of things. So in Professor David Nutt's risk of harm research that you can Google is really well publicized, we know that the psychedelics are in the bottom bottom end of the 20 most commonly used and abused drugs, alcohol, tobacco, heroin, cocaine are in the top 5, that sort of thing. So in terms of the damage they can do on a physical level, they're really quite negligible. MDMA has got more risk attached to it physiologically.
Why is that?
Because it's got a bit more of an amphetamine action, so that speediness, increased heart rate, temperature, blood pressure, those sorts of things. But the reason they were banned is not because of the physical harm they can do. It was much more of a socio-political banning that occurred, mostly in the context of the United States, with lots of young people using LSD, countercultural, civil rights, anti-war protests, that kind of thing. It was a way of controlling the people that were opening their minds with psychedelics by making them illegal. But to fast forward, proper research on MDMA began again with the first published study that was back in about 2010, 2011. It was the first RCT of MDMA-assisted therapy in PTSD, and it was wild how effective that first study was. And I first got interested in MDMA probably about that time, about 2010, and got involved in starting to work up some research into it, because it just was fascinating that you can take a drug to make a therapy more effective. Now that's been done with some other substances and it hasn't been effective. So in my research, we know there's a drug called D-cycloserine. When you add that to trauma therapy or prolonged exposure, it doesn't do anything. Other conditions it might work. MDMA, though, has got a really unique psychopharmacological profile, drug effect on the brain, different to any other drug. It works through releasing chemical messengers or neurotransmitters in the brain and stopping them from being, absorbed again. So it mostly has an effect through the chemical messengers, serotonin, a little bit through kind of like dopamine, through cortisol, those sorts of things as well. But its characteristic effect is feeling loved up, essentially. And that's because it absolutely dumps the love hormone, oxytocin. And oxytocin is released through, small amounts through like hugging a friend, pro-social touch, or through breastfeeding, or through orgasm, that kind of thing. So oxytocin's got quite a profound effect on, empathy and bonding and those sorts of things. And that's really interesting when you can give a drug to someone that can have an effect on empathy and bonding. And this would be especially the case in patients with PTSD who might really struggle with trusting a therapist, with letting their defense mechanisms, letting their guard down to be able to open up to therapy. But MDMA's got some really unique effects. The peak effects might be within about an hour or two after oral ingestion, and the person might feel, quite euphoric, quite happy. They will feel more inclined to talk. They might become really quite talkative and engaged. So those people that are below the optimal window of arousal are brought up. Then, paradoxically, it also has a relaxing effect. So the people that are hyper-aroused, that are above the window of tolerance, are brought down. So it can do both things at the same time. And there's something about oxytocin in the fear centers of the brain that it calms them. So the amygdala and the insula that were on fire are now regulated, and the emotional regulation centers of the brain are strengthened, and they're probably working more. So what happens probably when someone who has PTSD is given MDMA in a clinical setting with appropriate preparation and support is that their brain looks a lot more like the brain of someone who doesn't have PTSD whilst they're on that substance. Now, the way that works in therapy looks completely different to conventional psychological therapy. So instead of meeting in an office, the same office, 90 minutes every week, and doing your EMDR or whatever it might be, with MDMA therapy, you meet 2 therapists for maybe about 3 90-minute sessions, and you do a lot of preparation work. This is what could happen, this is what could come up, you're getting to know each other.
And already, the fact that it's 3 90-minute sessions, although that sounds intense, like people can have other types of therapies that are weekly and that go on for a very long time, and it's a massive resource for both involved. Sorry, it's really interesting.
You're completely right. And then after you've had your preparation sessions, with two, therapists or a therapist and a psychiatrist. You then have your first drug session, which is usually around about 8 hours long. You're lying in a bed. You've got either therapist aside of you. You're wearing an eye mask, and you're listening to music through headphones that's pre-selected.
You don't get to choose it?
I choose it.
The
as
doctor
as
chooses
the doctor.
it?
It's supposed
Is
to.
there doom metal in there, though?
Unfortunately not. When I had my MDMA training session, I did listen to metal.
Did
Actually.
you?
It was really good, yeah. But no, the music is really important. Music is the hidden therapist, is what one of my old friends, Mendel Kalin, said.
I love that.
It's lovely, isn't it?
I think it's true for a lot of people.
Yeah, but the music has got to be novel, instrumental, no vocals, and it's got to guide your journey. So as the MDMA is taking hold, it's nice and uplifting. As it's reaching its peak, you might want it to be a little bit challenging. As it's coming down, you want it to be nice and calming and relaxing. So the music guides the experience.
The Amelie soundtrack, then.
I wouldn't be able to say. I haven't seen that film in years. It's a good film.
It's a very nice soundtrack, though, and it's all instrumental.
Yeah. A lot of like Sigur Rós style stuff, so you'd love it. That kind of thing.
I like that.
Yeah. So during the MDMA experience, the person's actually closed. Their eyes are closed. They're wearing an eye mask. They're listening to music. What seems to happen is spontaneously they do the things that brains do to recover from trauma. Spontaneously.
Without any effort on their own part, without soul searching and berating themselves and forcing themselves.
So spontaneously, what seems to happen is the person might, re-experience the trauma. They might have a different view of it in that setting. They might have a different belief about it. They might realize that it's no longer dangerous. They might do all the things that we teach them in therapy, but for some reason, when they're on MDMA, it seems to happen spontaneously. When they want to, they can take the eye mask and the music off, and they can come out and talk to their therapist and say, oh my goodness, I've just realized it wasn't my fault. I've just forgiven myself for this. I've just realized I'm a good person, and then go back inwards and do more inner work.
Yeah.
And so I went to Charleston, South Carolina, 2016-ish, to be trained in MDMA therapy by Michael and Annie Mitoffer, that invented this model of therapy. And Michael and Annie had a lovely analogy, and they said that your body knows how to heal itself. If you're walking through the woods and you catch your arm on maybe a bit of jagged wood, and you cause a scratch, and it's nice and clean, it's not very deep, the edges aren't too ragged. You give it a little wipe, and then a scab forms. After a couple of days, it hardens. After maybe a week, the skin has regrown underneath, the scab falls off. Maybe you've got a little mark, but your body knows how to heal itself. You don't really have to do anything. But sometimes, maybe the wound wasn't just a little scratch. Maybe you actually caught your arm on like a rusty nail that was sticking out of a fence post. And maybe that wound was a lot deeper.
Yeah. It
was more traumatic. Maybe there were dirt and obstacles, debris in the wound. Maybe the edges were quite jagged and they needed, to actually be brought together.
Yeah.
If you left that might not heal. And that might fester for a long time and cause you lots of problems.
And more importantly, we wouldn't expect it to just heal.
Yeah.
We wouldn't expect it to spontaneously heal if it was full of debris and it looked really janky and we were in a lot of pain.
Sometimes some injuries are too big for the body to heal itself.
Okay.
So what you might need in that situation is for someone to come along and help remove the obstacles, to clean it, to remove the debris, maybe to sew it up, to suture it as well, to bring the edges together. And then once those obstacles have been removed, your body is still doing all the work and your body is still healing itself.
Yeah.
MDMA, Annie and Michael would say, is like the obstacle remover.
Oh, it's like the sutures.
MDMA is like the thing that allows you to face and process your trauma without the fear, without the hyper-arousal, without the dissociation, allow you to think in different ways about it, not down the same old pathways. So that's me kind of waxing on and on about MDMA. What we know clinically, multiple phase 2 studies, 2 large phase 3 studies. In, I believe the first one, it was, I might get it wrong, 64% of people in the MDMA group no longer met the criteria for PTSD at the end of the study. In the follow-up study, it was, I think it was around about 70-odd%. Maybe we'll put the actual stats somewhere. So it wasn't just improving PTSD, it was removing PTSD in the people that benefited from it not everyone. We're looking at 60 or 70% in the MDMA group, 20 to 40% in the placebo group.
But that's a huge result, though.
It's wildly effective in those studies.
I mean, I'd like those odds. If it was me, I'd like those odds.
As a trauma specialist, I like them too. And it did take 10 years to get it off the ground. We completed the first MDMA clinical trial, only treating one participant in Cardiff, and we're hoping to do more of our own Welsh, MDMA research to adapt the American model to one that would fit within the Welsh NHS. But I mean, can you imagine giving Iorek Byrnison some MDMA therapy?
I think he would spontaneously heal. He wants to be better. He's got the social factors in place to facilitate that. The resilience factors, I believe you called them.
Yeah.
But also, it's in his name. So unlike me, who is cursed with a name that actually means strife. I mean, my parents did not want me to be well. Iorek's name, Philip Pullman has given some great attention to detail with this. Iorek is such a formidable name because the Yor, otherwise kind of the Yar sound, is from Old Norse, and that means battle. And then you've got the Rek, which comes from Old Norse and the sort of ancient Germanic from the word Rika, and that means might, distinguished, and ruler.
Oh.
So we've obviously got this, the ruler of battle. I think that if he had some MDMA intervention, he would not have found himself enslaved by these humans at all.
If only it existed in their world.
I know.
In a clinical setting.
Of course, in a clinical setting, always. I mean, we have been saying that he should not have been self-medicating with alcohol. No. It did not do him any good.
No, it never does.
No. I think there is an interesting little nugget of information about polar bears.
Yeah.
That I was looking into. So we're moving away from Iorek now, and we're kind of looking at polar bears in general. So I was considering the fact that we obviously know the plight of the polar bear is dire.
Yeah.
We have seen the dreadful images of those emaciated polar bears scavenging for food. And I think if you asked most people across any age range, they would be able to conjure that up as one of the sort of flagship creatures that's suffering from the environmental collapse, essentially.
And then contrast that with the popular use of the polar bear selling Coca-Cola for a large corporation that's responsible for untold environmental and capitalist damage.
Exactly. And I was looking into the fact that obviously we know that global warming is impacting them, but just like you've touched on, actually, it's weird, you must have read my mind, there has been, this comprehensive study, and there's been 60 years of anecdotal evidence gathered that's highlighting the fact that human-produced waste is impacting polar bears because they are attracted to rubbish.
Right. So
by getting into sort of big garbage dumps, and because of the vast amount of pollution that's, hitting our oceans and things, like, they are becoming habituated to human food sources, and that's obviously making them lose their natural fear of humans. And although we joked earlier about seeing one in the street, that's all very well. If we see one in the street, we're not a gun-toting nation. Yeah. But there are places that people will be getting trigger happy if they're seeing polar bears roaming around. There were, between 1870 to 2014 though, which is a big old time stretch, there was only like 73 incidents of, polar bear attacks that actually ended up with 20 fatalities. Oh, wow. But again, these were significantly because of nutritionally stressed adults. Yeah. It's very clear that food scarcity is causing aggressive behaviour. Yeah. I thought it was really interesting that in 2019 there was a state of emergency declared in Novaya in Russia because basically over 50 polar bears just entered one of the settlements there. They were scavenging for food and basically just caused widespread chaos. Wow. I mean, I did find myself thinking, oh yeah, but if I was safely behind some double glazing, I wouldn't mind watching 50 polar bears.
That'd be amazing to watch.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
They just had enough. They were like, we need to get some food.
Such a large number of polar bears.
Have you seen the amazing images of the polar bears in Churchill in Manitoba?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, I can't. So basically it's nicknamed like the polar bear capital of the world.
Right.
Because it's become a focal point for studying human polar bear interactions. Basically from like the 70s onwards, because the ice had been breaking up way earlier in the season, bears just started coming ashore earlier in Churchill, and that meant that they were also increasing the duration of their stay near humans, and obviously again that extended presence lowers their inhibitions and also makes them probably take more risky behavior. But basically they've created a polar bear jail. Yeah. No. So but not in a horrible, terrifying way. Like that sounds awful, but it's actually funny. To try and mitigate these conflicts, they've
like a drunk
got
tank
this
for the polar bears.
Yeah, basically facility where problematic bears are detained until they can be safely released. So they just sort of like,
you have the right to remain silent.
They let them wander around this facility and they're like, they need to cool off in there, and then we'll let them back out again. They need to learn their lesson.
Amazing.
I thought that there was something to be said as well about how essentially, you know, even in the trilogy itself, Pullman's been very clever because essentially the Panzerborn serve as a commentary on colonialism. I know it sounds like a stretch, but if you think about it, every polar bear that we see in the trilogy that has severe negative consequences, it's a direct result of interacting with humans.
Yeah.
So even when Iorek gets his place in the hierarchy restored, that is through human trickery. Like Lyra supports him, and although we're rooting for that to happen, it's a very subtle way of looking at how the imposition of foreign values on indigenous cultures can just ravage those structures. The bears' resistance to human attempts at control and their eventual reclamation of autonomy basically underscores the importance of cultural preservation and self-determination.
I like that.
And I like that a lot. And I think it's why this series in general is such a beautiful one, because it created quite an uproar. Like I used to work at the Entertainer, the toy shop, like when I was still at college. And you know, they famously don't sell Harry Potter products.
It's a Christian company, isn't it? And Harry, and you know, they don't sell Harry Potter products because of the sort of the idea of witchcraft. But I mean, his Dark Materials is famously literally an attack on the institution of the church. Yeah, without spoiling it. It's how do you say it without spoiling it? The Magisterium. Yeah. Everyone should definitely go and read this trilogy. It's amazing. This conversation's making me want to go back and read it again as well. It's a stunning it's so good series. And you know, we've now got a whole universe now, because we had the trilogy, then we had the film. The film was awful, don't bother watching it. But the BBC series. So I haven't seen the series, I told you earlier. Yeah, well, the BBC series is great. The film, dreadful. Although Nicole Kidman was an excellent choice for Mrs. Coulter. She's got that aloof porcelain nature that makes her so hard to read and allows people to project ideas onto her of what she might be like. But we've now got the new books, La Belle Sauvage and The Secret Commonwealth. So La Belle Sauvage starts when Lyra is a baby. So it goes back in time. So it's how she ends up at Jordan. Yeah. And then The Secret Commonwealth, she's 20. Oh, interesting. Okay, so like the life cycle, completing the picture. Yeah, and Philip Pullman needs to pull his finger out and get the third book out now in that, because I've been waiting for a while. Ooh, okay. I'm gonna have to go back and start reading some more, I think. Yeah, right. Well, I'll watch the TV show first. Yeah, you should watch the TV show, because, to be fair, the acting in that is incredible, and they do a very, very good job at dealing with. There's a lot of nuance in these books, and they are dense, and they really do cover quite a lot of the themes, and they do justice to the depth of the characters, which I really like.
Right, well, thank you so much for being my guest. It's
Thank
been
you,
lovely
Kelly.
to talk to you.
Lovely
Thank
talking to you too, dude. Yeah. Thanks for having me and for having Lyra as well, because she interjected a couple of times. Not
Oh,
very
she's
much.
very welcome. She's
Yeah.
very cute. We'll post a picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Elliot explains. You know how everybody thinks polar bears are white? It's just their fur is transparent and their skin is black. They look white because of the snow and ice reflecting in them.